My wife drove to the post office every Saturday morning for 32 years. She would wake before sunrise, brew a single cup of coffee, kiss me on the forehead, and tell me she was going to pick up the mail and run a few errands. I never thought to question it. I was a man who trusted his wife the way you trust the ground beneath your feet. You don't think about it. You just walk. But standing at her graveside on a cold October afternoon in Knoxville, Tennessee, with the oak trees dropping their last leaves onto the polished casket, I found out that the ground had never been quite where I thought it was. Before I tell you what I found and what I did with it, let me ask you something. Have you ever been made to feel worthless by the very people you spent your life building up? Have you ever been looked at by your own blood like you were a problem to be solved rather than a father to be loved? If you have, then you already know how this story feels. My name is Frank Dalton. I am 67 years old, and what happened to me after Eleanor died is something I will carry for the rest of my life. Eleanor and I were married for 41 years. She was a quiet woman, the kind of person who listened more than she spoke and who noticed things that other people walked right past. She had grown up poor in eastern Tennessee, the daughter of a coal miner who died young, and she carried that upbringing like a compass. She never wasted a thing. She reused aluminum foil. She sewed patches onto the elbows of my work shirts. She clipped coupons out of the Sunday paper and organized them in a little accordion folder she kept in her purse. I was a licensed electrician who spent 4 decades rewiring houses and pulling cable through walls. I made decent money. Not wealthy money, but enough. And every paycheck I brought home, Eleanor managed. I was happy to let her. Numbers were not my gift. Keeping a house running was not my skill. That was Ellie's world. And she kept it immaculate. We had 2 children, my son Derek, who was 40 at the time of Eleanor's passing, and my daughter Patrice, 37. Derek had married a woman named Sandra about 12 years back. Sandra was the kind of person who said the right things in public and something entirely different in private. She called Eleanor Mom at holiday dinners and then complained to Derek on the drive home that his parents lived in too big a house for 2 old people. I know this because Eleanor told me. She had ears like a cat, my wife. She heard everything. She just chose carefully what she responded to. When the cancer came, it moved fast. Eleanor was diagnosed in February, and she was gone by October. 8 months. In that time, she lost weight, lost her hair, and lost the ability to drive. But she never lost her clarity. She remained sharp and deliberate right to the end, spending hours in her small home office with the door closed, making phone calls I never asked about, and writing letters in her careful, slanted handwriting. I thought she was managing her medical paperwork. I thought she was saying goodbye to old friends. I left her to it because that was what she asked me to do. I trusted her. That was what we did. The funeral was on a Thursday. By Friday evening, my son and his wife were in my kitchen with printed spreadsheets. I had barely changed out of my black suit. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee, looking at nothing in particular, when they came in without knocking. Derek set a stack of papers on the table in front of me. Sandra stood slightly behind him with her arms crossed, which was how she always stood when she had already decided the outcome of a conversation. "Dad," Derek said, using the voice he reserved for difficult clients at the contracting business he ran. "We need to talk about the situation." I looked up at him. "What situation?" "The financial situation." He pulled out a chair and sat down across from me. He spread the papers like a hand of cards. I could see numbers on them but couldn't make out the figures from where I sat. "Mom handled everything, and now that she's gone, we need to take stock. You are 67, Dad. You have a fixed income. This house has property taxes, upkeep costs, a utility bill that is honestly absurd for one person. It's too much." Sandra moved to the counter and leaned against it. "What Derek is trying to say is that we want to help you. We've been doing research. There's a really lovely independent living community about 20 minutes from here. It's not a nursing home, Frank. It's more like a resort. Active seniors, social events, no yard to maintain, no roof to worry about." She placed a glossy brochure on top of Derek's spreadsheets. On the cover was a photograph of smiling white-haired people playing pickleball beside a fountain. We already toured it. There's a unit available now. First floor. It is perfect for you. I stared at the brochure. I had just put my wife in the ground 24 hours ago. And the house? I asked. Derek glanced at Sandra, a glance I was not supposed to see. The house would go on the market. The equity is significant. We could split it 3 ways, help cover your costs at Shady Oaks, and still have something left over for the kids' college funds. He paused. It's what makes sense, Dad. You can't run this place alone. You never handled the finances. You said so yourself. Let us help you. I sat quietly for a long moment. 41 years of marriage had taught me that silence can be a weapon or a shield. I chose to use it as a shield. Let me think about it, I said. Sandra's smile tightened at the corners. We were hoping to move quickly. The real estate market is, I said I'll think about it. They left an hour later. I heard Sandra on the phone in the driveway before the car door closed. She was asking someone to confirm whether the independent living facility held deposits on reserved units. She was not asking for my benefit. I sat alone in the house Eleanor and I had lived in for 29 years. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the mantel ticked. I could smell the ghost of her lotion in the air, that faint lavender and something underneath it that I could never name. But that meant her, meant safe, meant home. I walked into her office. It was exactly as she had left it the last week. She was able to sit upright. The desk was clear except for a small clay pot of dried flowers that Patrice had brought her. A framed photograph of us on our 20th anniversary. And one other thing. A key. Small, flat, stamped in dull brass. Attached to a red plastic keychain with the number stenciled on it in black marker. 217. Nothing else. No note. Just the key. Sitting in the center of the desk, as though it had been placed there deliberately, at eye level, where I could not miss it. I picked it up. I turned it over in my hands. It wasn't a house key. It wasn't a car key. It was the type of key you'd see at a post office. The kind for a private mailbox. I had seen those before, years ago, when my father rented one to keep his business mail separate from his personal mail. My wife had a post office box. She had gone there every Saturday for 32 years. And she had left me this key. I drove to the post office the next morning before my son could call to pressure me further. The building was a squat red brick structure off Kingston Pike, the kind of place that smelled of ink and bureaucratic indifference. I walked in, found the wall of private mailbox doors, and counted my way down to 217. I slid the key into the lock. It turned without resistance, as though it had been waiting for me. Inside, the box was not empty. There was a single sealed envelope, thick, with my name written on the outside in Eleanor's handwriting. Frank. Just my name, the way she had written it in birthday cards, and on the notes she tucked into my lunch pail when I was still working. I stood there in the middle of the post office holding it, and for a moment I could not breathe. The fluorescent lights buzzed above me. A woman behind me was asking the clerk about a package. The world went on in its ordinary way, and I stood at the edge of something enormous. I drove home before I opened it. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my son had laid out his spreadsheets, and I opened the envelope carefully, the way you open something you want to preserve. Inside were 2 things. The first was a handwritten letter. 3 pages, front and back, in Eleanor's careful slant. I will not share every word she wrote, because those words belong to me and to her. But I will tell you the essential of it. She told me that she loved me. She told me she was sorry for the weight of the secret she had carried, and she explained why she had carried it. She wrote that she had started small, 32 years ago, taking the household surplus from my paychecks and doing what she called experimenting. She was not reckless. She was methodical. She had read every book on investing she could get from the library. She had taken an adult education class in finance at the community college and told me she was taking a ceramics class. She had opened a brokerage account in her own name, funded it slowly, and she had been patient in a way that most people simply are not capable of. She wrote that she kept it secret for one reason. Not because she didn't trust me, but because she knew our children. She wrote those exact words. She said Derek had always wanted more than he was willing to work for. She said Sandra was a woman who would spend whatever she could see and take whatever she could reach. She said she loved them, but she knew them, and she had watched the way they treated money their entire adult lives. Always expecting rescue, always looking to the next windfall rather than their own labor. She did not want them to know what we had, because the moment they knew, she wrote, they would start circling, and she wanted me to be safe. She wanted me to be protected. She wanted whoever came first to this little brass key to be me. The second thing in the envelope was a business card. An attorney in downtown Knoxville. His name was Paul Weston. She had written 4 words on the back of the card in red ink. He has been waiting. I drove to Paul Weston's office that same afternoon. His suite was on the 10th floor of a glass building on Gay Street. Modest but deliberate. The kind of office that tells you the man inside doesn't need to impress you. His assistant walked me straight in when I gave my name. Paul Weston was in his mid-50s, trim, with reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead. He stood when I entered and extended his hand, and his expression carried the same mixture of sadness and weight that Mr. Paxton had carried for other men in other stories. He said he was sorry for my loss. He said Eleanor had been one of the most clear-headed clients he had ever worked with. He said she had given him very specific instructions. He walked me through what she had built. I sat in a leather chair across from his desk, and I listened. 32 years of Saturday mornings. 32 years of compounding interest, of dividend reinvestment, of buying low during downturns, when everyone else was selling in panic. She had invested in utilities, in index funds, in real estate investment trusts. She had purchased 2 small commercial properties in the Bearden area of Knoxville through a holding company she set up with Paul's help 12 years ago. She had been the silent majority stakeholder in a self-storage facility on the edge of town for the past 8 years, an investment that had tripled in value as the neighborhood developed around it. Paul Weston placed a single sheet of paper on the desk between us and turned it to face me. The total appraised value of the Eleanor Dalton Revocable Trust, as of the previous Friday, was $4,980,000. I sat with that number for a long time. I looked at Paul Weston. He looked back at me, with patience. She wanted you to take a moment, he said. I did. When I could speak again, I asked him the same question I imagine anyone would ask. Why didn't she tell me? And Paul Weston answered the same way I imagine Eleanor would have answered, because she had clearly told him what to say. He told me that Eleanor knew I would have insisted on telling the children. He told me she knew that the moment Derek and Sandra believed there was significant money involved, they would change, that the dynamic between parent and child would shift from love to transaction, and she had spent decades watching other families destroyed by exactly that transition. She wanted to give me whatever time we had left, in peace. She wanted our last years together to be unmarred by that particular kind of greed. She knew, Paul said simply. She always knew. He reached into his desk and produced a sealed envelope. He slid it across to me. Eleanor's handwriting on the front again. Open this when they show you who they are, she had written. I put the envelope in my jacket pocket. Paul spent the next hour walking me through the trust document. I was the sole trustee and the sole beneficiary, with absolute discretion over any distribution to the children. Neither Derek nor Patrice had any claim unless I chose to give them one. The 2 commercial properties, the brokerage accounts, the self-storage stake, all of it was mine to manage, mine to protect, mine to deploy as I saw fit. I drove back to the house, and I cooked myself dinner for the first time in 41 years. It was not good, but I sat at the kitchen table, and I ate it, and I thought about Saturday mornings. I thought about Eleanor in her car, coffee in the cup holder, the radio on low, driving to that red brick post office before the city was awake. I thought about what it cost her to carry that alone, and I thought about the envelope in my jacket pocket. I decided I would wait one more day before opening it. I did not have to wait long for my children to show me who they were. Derek and Sandra arrived Sunday morning with a locksmith. I am not describing a metaphor. There was a man in a gray uniform van parked at the end of my driveway, and my son was telling me that they were having the locks changed for security purposes, given that Eleanor was gone and the house was technically part of the estate, and they had spoken to a realtor who felt the listing should go live by the end of the month. And it would be far simpler if I was already moved out rather than the realtor having to work around a resident. And really, Dad, this is for your benefit. Everything they were doing was for my benefit. Had I made any progress with Shady Oaks? Had I called the number Sandra left? Did I understand that this was just the practical thing? I stood in my own doorway and I listened to all of it. Then I asked Derek to send the locksmith home. He said he didn't think that was a good idea. I asked him again. Sandra stepped forward. She told me I was being emotional, which was understandable given what I had been through, but that emotions were not a financial strategy, and what they were doing was protecting me whether I could see it in the moment or not. I looked at my son. He was looking at the ground. Derek, I said. Look at me. He looked up. His eyes were the same eyes I had looked into when I drove him to his first day of kindergarten and promised him everything would be all right. I looked for that boy. Strange. I did not find him. Send the locksmith home, I said one more time. He did not. So I went inside, closed the door, and called Paul Weston. That evening, alone in the house, I finally opened Eleanor's second envelope. Inside was a handwritten list, 12 entries, dated over the span of 15 years, each one describing a sum of money and a circumstance. The first entry was from 11 years ago. Derek had come to Eleanor privately, not to me, privately, and asked for $30,000 to cover a business loss he had not disclosed to his lenders. She paid it. The second entry. Sandra had accumulated significant credit card debt across 3 accounts she kept separate from their joint finances. Eleanor paid it. $18,000. There were entries for Patrice too. Smaller ones. A car loan. Eleanor quietly cleared. A deposit on an apartment she fronted when Patrice left her first husband with 2 days' notice. And nowhere to go. Eleanor had not written these things in judgment. She had written them plainly, without editorial, as a record. At the bottom of the list, in smaller letters, she had written one line. They never paid me back, and I never asked. But you should know. I sat with that list for a very long time. The next morning, I put on the charcoal blazer Eleanor had bought me 2 Christmases ago. I had worn it twice. It still smelled faintly like the inside of the box it came in. I drove to Paul Weston's office, and I told him I was ready to proceed. Paul laid out the options. We could file a formal notice requiring Derek and Sandra to vacate the property immediately, since they had no legal standing to alter or occupy it without my consent as trustee. We could simultaneously call in the informal loans Eleanor had made, reclassified under the trust document as outstanding debts to the estate. Or we could wait, allow them to believe they had leverage, and let them show their hand more fully before we moved. I said I had seen enough. Paul filed the paperwork the following morning. He arranged for the meeting. 3 days later, Derek and Sandra arrived at Paul's office. They had brought their own attorney, a young man in a shiny suit who shuffled papers and looked increasingly uncomfortable as the meeting progressed. Patrice had been informed by phone. She did not come. I will tell you more about that shortly. I was already seated when they walked in. I had arrived 15 minutes early. I was sitting at the head of the conference table with my hands folded on the surface in front of me, a glass of water at my elbow, and Paul Weston to my right. I was wearing the charcoal blazer. My shoes were clean. I had shaved carefully that morning. I did not look like the man who had sat at the kitchen table 2 weeks ago, hollow-eyed, unreachable with grief. I looked like someone who had made a decision. Sandra came in first. She saw me at the head of the table, and her step hitched, barely perceptibly, but I saw it. Derek followed. He pulled out a chair across from me and sat down heavily. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Dad," he said, "I don't know what this is about, but I think we should have handled this as a family." "We are handling it as a family," I said. Sit down, Sandra. She sat. Paul Weston opened the folder in front of him and began. He explained the trust. He explained my role as sole trustee. He explained that the deed to the property at 1440 Birchwood Drive, the house I had wired and drywalled and painted and lived in for 29 years, was an asset of the Eleanor Dalton Revocable Trust. He explained that no party other than the trustee had any claim on any asset within that trust. He explained that the locks had already been changed back by a licensed locksmith I had hired, as was my right as the property owner. He placed the deed on the table. Derek's attorney leaned forward and murmured something in his ear. Derek looked at me. "How much?" he asked. His voice had changed. The concern for me was gone. He was doing arithmetic behind his eyes. Paul read the appraised total. The room was very quiet. Sandra's eyes went from the paper to me, and I watched the calculation happen in real time. I watched her do what Eleanor had predicted she would do. The warmth came back into her face. A smile appeared. It was not a new smile. It was the same smile I had seen at 12 Thanksgivings and at a funeral last week, deployed now for a different purpose. "Frank," she said, and her voice was butter. "This is incredible. Your wife was remarkable. This is a gift for all of us. This is a fresh start." She reached across the table toward my hand. "We can sit down together and figure out a fair way to make sure everyone is taken care of. We are family. That's what this is for." I looked at her hand. I did not take it. "Paul," I said, "please continue." Paul continued. He explained the outstanding debts. He read from Eleanor's list. Each entry, each date, each amount. The room got quieter. With every number, Derek's attorney stopped murmuring. Sandra's hand withdrew from the table. By the time Paul reached the total, $61,000 between them, Sandra's face had moved through its repertoire and arrived at something I can only describe as bare. Whatever she wore over her real face was gone, and what was underneath was cold and afraid. "Those were gifts," Sandra said. "Eleanor gave us those freely. She never said anything about repayment. They were classified as demand loans within the trust document," Paul said, without inflection. "Signed by Eleanor and notarized 18 months ago. The expectation of repayment was established in writing. You are welcome to consult with your own counsel regarding options." Derek's attorney was already putting papers back into his briefcase. "We don't have that money," Derek said. His voice was flat. He wasn't angry. He sounded like a man who had just understood something he had been avoiding for years. He looked at me. "Dad, come on. This isn't you. This is a lawyer talking. Mom wouldn't have wanted this." I waited until he finished. "Your mother left me very specific instructions," I said. "She knew exactly what she wanted. She spent years making sure I would be all right. That was what she spent her Saturday mornings doing for 32 years, taking care of me, the way the two of you were taking care of me by bringing a locksmith to my house." Derek looked down at the table. "You have 30 days to arrange repayment," Paul said. "And you have 30 days to vacate the property at Birchwood Drive, at which time I will be filing for formal possession as trustee. Any personal items remaining after that period become property of the trust." Sandra stood, her chair pushed back hard enough to slide across the floor. "This is not legal," she said, her voice shaking. "You cannot do this. He is an old man. He does not understand what he's signing. He just lost his wife. He is not competent to make these decisions." Paul Weston removed his reading glasses and set them on the table. He looked at Sandra with an expression of professional calm that I imagine he had spent years perfecting. "Mrs. Dalton," he said. Eleanor Dalton required a full neurological competency evaluation for her husband as a condition of finalizing this trust. The evaluation was conducted 6 months ago by 2 independent practitioners. Mr. Dalton was determined to be fully competent and capable of managing his affairs. "You are welcome to review the documentation." He slid a copy of the evaluation across the table. Sandra did not pick it up. They left without shaking hands. I sat at the conference table for a few minutes after they were gone. Paul poured himself a cup of coffee from the machine on the credenza and waited. "There's one more thing," I said, when I was ready. I told him about Patrice. Patrice had not come to the meeting, but she had called me the evening before, which was the first time she had called since the funeral. She had called not to demand, and not to threaten, and not to perform sympathy for an audience. She had called to apologize. It had been a short call. She said she had known something was wrong in the days since the funeral. She said watching Derek and Sandra operate had made her sick in a way she didn't have words for. She said she was sorry she had not spoken up sooner. She said she did not know what I intended to do with whatever Eleanor had left, and she was not calling to ask. She was calling because I was her father, and she wanted me to know that she was sorry. It was not a perfect call. It did not undo anything, but it was real. I had known my daughter for 37 years, and I knew the difference between her performing and her meaning something. She meant it. I told Paul to exclude Patrice from the debt proceedings. The amount Eleanor had provided for her over the years was smaller, and the circumstances were different. I did not feel I needed to explain further. Paul simply made a note. I left his office and drove to a nursery on the west side of the city and bought 6 azalea bushes. Eleanor had always wanted azaleas along the back fence, but had never gotten around to planting them. I spent that afternoon in the yard with a spade, digging holes in the October dirt. I was not particularly good at it. My back protested. The ground was harder than I expected, but I dug 6 holes, and I planted 6 azaleas, and I knew they would bloom in the spring. Derek and Sandra vacated the house in 22 days. I was not home when they left. I did not choose to be. Paul's office received a formal notification from their attorney, confirming the removal of personal effects and the surrender of keys, the keys to my house that they had no right to change in the first place. The payment plan for the outstanding debt took several months to negotiate. I will tell you honestly that I did not expect full recovery. What I expected was acknowledgement, some recognition that what had been taken had value, that what Eleanor had given had not been infinite or free. The acknowledgement came, slowly, in increments, in wire transfers that arrived each month with no accompanying message. I did not need a message. Sandra filed for divorce from Derek 6 weeks after the meeting. I heard about it from Patrice, who had heard it from Derek himself when he called her, which surprised me. He had called her not to spin the situation but to say he was lost. Patrice told me he sounded like a man who was looking at himself clearly, possibly for the first time. I did not know what to do with that information, except hold it carefully and give it time. By the following spring, I had moved into an apartment on the north side of Knoxville. It was not the penthouse in some hotel. It was a 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a clean building, with an elevator and a balcony that looked east toward the mountains. I kept Eleanor's framed photograph on the desk in the 2nd bedroom, which I had set up as an office. I kept the brass key from the post office in the small ceramic dish by the front door, where I dropped my own keys each evening. Every time I passed it, I thought of Saturday mornings. I thought of a woman driving alone in the early dark, doing what she did so quietly, so completely, and I thought that if I had 1,000 years, I could not fully comprehend the kind of love that works like that, the kind that plans for your protection when it will not be there to protect you. Through Paul, I began the process of establishing a small fund in Eleanor's name. It was not a grand foundation, nothing with a board of directors and a press release. It was a targeted thing, a resource administered through a local legal aid organization, focused specifically on elderly residents of Knox County who were facing financial exploitation by family members. The cases were not rare. They came in regularly, and they looked like mine, or like variations of mine, with different names and different addresses, but the same essential shape. Someone who worked hard, someone who trusted, and someone else who waited for the moment of vulnerability to extract what they could. The fund paid for legal representation. It connected people with attorneys who knew what to look for, who understood trust law and estate documents, and the particular cruelty of being told by your own child that you are too old or too confused or too much of a burden to have a say in your own life. I went to Paul's office every month to review the cases and sign authorizations. I did not think of it as revenge, and I want to be clear about that distinction because it matters. Revenge is hot and fast, and it burns itself out. What Eleanor had given me was something cooler and more lasting than revenge. It was structure. It was a net I could cast for other people, because she had cast one for me. Patrice called more often now. She drove up from Chattanooga once a month, and we had dinner, usually at a diner near my apartment that made the kind of pie Eleanor would have approved of. She never asked about the money, and I never raised it. We talked about her kids, about what she was reading, about the old neighborhood, about the small things that constitute a life in progress. Some evenings, when the light was going down over the mountains, and we were sitting in the parking lot of the diner not quite ready to say goodbye, she would get quiet in a way that reminded me of her mother. That same quality of listening, of noticing more than she said. I thought a lot in those months about what Eleanor had written. She knew our children better than they knew themselves. That sentence stayed with me, because it was not a condemnation. It was an observation, made with eyes open, and it contained inside it the same love that had carried all four of us through 41 years. She had not stopped loving Derek and Patrice when she documented their failures. She had continued to love them with exactly the level of honesty they needed, even if they could not see it. I do not know what my son became in the year after everything fell apart. I know he moved into a smaller place and started working for a competitor of his former business, which meant working for someone else rather than himself. And I know that for Derek, that was a considerable humbling. I know he and Sandra are divorced. I know that for a long time after the meeting in Paul's office, he did not reach out to me, and I did not reach out to him. I know that eventually, on a Sunday in early April, he left a voicemail. He did not ask for money. He did not explain himself at length. He said he had been doing a lot of thinking and that he was sorry and that he wanted to know if we could get coffee sometime. He said he would understand if the answer was no. I sat with that voicemail for 2 weeks. Then, I called him back. I am not telling you that I forgave him immediately. I am not telling you that we sat down over coffee and repaired 40 years of relationship in an afternoon. I am telling you that I made the call because Eleanor's letter said to give them one last chance to be human. And because the voicemail sounded like he was finally trying. What he does with the chance is up to him. I have done my part. I am not his mother. I cannot carry what he refuses to carry for himself. There is a Saturday in March that I want to tell you about. 8 months after Eleanor died, I drove to the post office on Kingston Pike out of habit, or perhaps out of something stronger than habit. I did not have a key anymore. Box 217 was rented to someone else now. A small business, I assumed, given the stack of envelopes I could see through the little glass window when I paused in front of it. I stood in the lobby of that post office in the early morning and I thought about 32 years of Saturdays. I thought about Eleanor in her good shoes, the ones she kept separate from her everyday ones. I thought about what she was doing in there, which was not picking up mail. Or, not only that, she was meeting with the branch representative who held her account. She was reviewing her holdings. She was making decisions. She was building something in the early morning quiet while the city was still waking up. While I was at home drinking coffee and reading the paper and believing that things were exactly as they appeared. She was the most extraordinary person I have ever known. And I did not fully know it until she was gone. I pushed through the glass door and stepped out into the March morning. The air was cold and clean and held the particular quality of light that comes just before full spring, when everything is still bare but you can feel the green underneath. Waiting. I stood on the sidewalk, and I took a long breath. I was not Henry from Pittsburgh or anyone else's story. I was Frank Dalton, 67 years old, electrician, husband, father, trustee. I had been underestimated, discarded, and then quietly, methodically, and without fanfare, saved by the woman I had spent my adult life beside. I had been handed the tools she spent decades building, and what I chose to do with them, that part was mine. I walked to my car. I had a meeting that afternoon with Paul and with the legal aid coordinator to review 3 new cases. 3 people who needed what Eleanor had left me enough of to give away. I had work to do, and I was grateful for it. Sometimes love does not look like what you expect. Sometimes it looks like a small brass key on a cleared desk. Sometimes it looks like Saturday mornings, year after year, while the world assumes you are simply running errands. Sometimes the person standing quietly beside you is the one holding the whole structure together, and you only understand the weight of what they carried when you are finally asked to carry some of it yourself. Be honest with your spouse. Protect what you have built together. And never, not for one single morning, take for granted the person who gets up before the sun.